You're listening to the Future Tech Health Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Until I reached age 40, I never realized the obvious, that we all have medical issues, or we at least have a family member or close relation that had, has, or will have them in the future. Medicine and biological systems are the final frontier. Until we've conquered death, figured out how life began, cured cancer, and understood our purpose in the universe, there's a heck of a lot to talk about when it comes to our health. Future Tech Health means I'll be covering futuristic topics that are actually already in clinical trials, or even starting to appear on shelves or by prescription, or available for your own use. We dive deep into stem cells, CRISPR-Cas9, the science of sleep, epigenetics, medical testing, cancer, ketogenic diets, stem cells, aging, regenerative medicine, and more. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a serious medical problem. Remember, however, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and share it with friends. Thank you.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Future Tech Podcast. And I have Ray Dogum. He's the head of his own podcast called Health Unchained, and he focuses on blockchain and how it's being used in the healthcare field. So very interesting. Ray, thank you for being here.
Richard, thank you for having me on the show. I've been a listener for a while, so thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate it. So why healthcare and why blockchain in healthcare? Unfortunately, it usually means the person's had health problems themselves, but hopefully that's not the case with you. What's your backstory on it?
I mean, I would say like everyone has their own personal experiences in the healthcare industry, just navigating through a hospital visit or dealing with someone who, has been diagnosed with a serious illness and just going through that process of collecting information, helping them navigate different providers and organizing insurance information and just getting all that paperwork done. I don't think anyone loves that process. But the way I feel, or the way that I'm seeing the industry as it grows, is that there's opportunity for better interoperability, better communication amongst different companies and different industry, like silos of I guess, data banks that we have now. And that can't, in my view, I don't think it could be done unless we use some sort of distributed system to not only align the interests in the data, but also the financial interests and the financial incentives in the healthcare field.
It's weird. I mean, my health records are probably in 20 different places. I'm in my 40s. Anyone in their 40s, 50s, 60s, I mean, they're never going to get most of their healthcare data. It's all over the place.
Right.
I mean, it's hard to get. It makes you wonder, first, why isn't this stuff all in one common database where it's accessible by the person whose health data it is?
Well, there is a good answer for that, I think. Until, recent technology like blockchain, we couldn't really, we needed to protect that data separately because of HIPAA compliance laws. So every organization or provider, health organization, they wanted to keep their patients' information held securely. And if one patient's information was, loaded onto a single database that everyone used, a breach into that database could mean, a huge loss of patient information, and that can be leaked into the internet. So having them in silos kind of prevents one person from accessing all of a person's health information at the same time. So they'll have to go to all the multiple silos. But again, that makes it really hard for the patient, and it makes it really hard for the provider as well, because the provider is probably working with limited information about the patient that can cause, misdiagnoses or just misinformation to the patient as well. So, I started, looking at blockchain as a solution, and the way I saw it was I knew this technology is going to take many, many years for actual adoption to occur. So I realized, being in healthcare myself, I work for a company called American Well. It's a telehealth company. I'm a project manager there, where I actually help health systems implement telehealth solutions. And, just speaking to the folks there, speaking at, to people at many different conferences and just kind of like networking, I realized healthcare has a huge problem with trust. And the promise of blockchain and distributed ledger technology is to create a trusted relationship with people without having to necessarily trust, who they are exactly. So you can trust that the data that you own will be continuously owned by you and only accessible by you. And in a way, if someone wants to access it, you can give them permission to do that. But, you would be able to see whether or not they did access it or not. And this is just like a theoretical, like a single workflow that I'm talking about. There are many different implementations of blockchain. Currently, there are,
Sure.
I've interviewed over 40 companies already in the space on my podcast. Started about a year ago. And yeah.
But what's the nice thing? Like compared to Bitcoin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Someone would have an incentive to break into your Bitcoin wallet and steal your stuff because it's fungible. It's worth a lot of money. There's very little incentive for 99% of the people in the world for someone to steal your health data. It's not really worth much, So blockchain has great security, but even so, I would think there's very little danger of someone wanting to steal your health records. If you're a politician, okay, or a movie star or a really high net worth person, but then you can always charge that person more for added layers of security if they need. But for the average person, who cares if they steal part of my data and they know I had, a sinus infection 3 times in the past 4 years? I mean, how's that going to help them? So I would think this is a no-brainer solution. The blockchain would be great at it.
Yeah. So what we're talking about now is medical records on the blockchain kind of application. And that's just one of the applications. And I agree with you. For most people, it doesn't matter too much. But you never know. A person, could become famous in the future, and then their previous health records could be used against them, for example. And another thing is the data itself has some value too. If you think about what pharmaceutical companies do, is they purchase de-identified health data in order to try to identify better drugs to use for specific types of illnesses. That's an example there.
Right, but the nature of blockchain is that data is in little mini vaults.
Mm-hmm.
If I have my health data and it's at a whole bunch of different addresses, I mean, good luck cracking one, much less 5, 10, 20 of them. So I mean, you could set it up in a way where it would be so unworth it for someone to crack X numbers of addresses to get your health data as to be, I think, a great solution. And then me as the owner of my own data, I could monetize it pretty easily and kind of flip the script on it, where the data now is valuable to me and I can make money from it.
Right.
I can choose to share it and monetize it. So
Exactly.
In terms of blockchain, this seems like a great solution.
Right. And it'll continue to be more valuable as the technology improves. For example, genetic information. Your genetic data is valuable to you. It can be, used in many applications. Companies seek that data. It's valuable to them as well. But right now, we don't really have ownership of it. There are companies trying to create that sort of business model where the person owns their own data and they can monetize it themselves. One company I actually interviewed was Nebula Genomics. They're actually based here in Boston, or at least they were founded here for sure, in Harvard. And I would say that what they're doing is pretty interesting, and they're allowing people to do a whole genome sequencing on their, they spit into a little vial, they get that sequence, and then they can look for certain types of studies that are being done that are in line with their DNA, and then they could basically collect some funding for participating in that study. So they might have to answer a few questions, or they might have to provide additional samples of whatever, but it allows the person to kind of participate in science really, and be compensated for that time and effort as well.
So why is blockchain not being adopted here? What do you see as the stumbling blocks? Is it political? Is it technology? Is it economic? I mean, what are the issues?
Yeah, there's multiple issues. One thing is, in healthcare, most technology takes a long time to become adopted. As I said, I work for a telehealth technology provider, American Well, and telehealth might seem like a great idea to us right now. Having a conversation with your doctor over a video chat versus having to go many miles, perhaps, just to do a consultation. That makes sense to us, right? But there are still barriers for that to happen. Different states have different laws. But again, I think the state of telehealth now is pretty good. But again, telehealth has been part of the ecosystem for over 10 years. It's just now becoming more embraced. So that's just an example of technology taking time in healthcare. And I think for blockchain, it's even more complicated because you're introducing potentially tokens or things of value like coins, crypto.
Well, you don't
coins.
have to. You
don't have to necessarily, right? You don't have to, but a lot of times you can use tokens to actually incentivize different behaviors that you're looking for. So I would say that the companies that are leveraging blockchain without tokens or coins might have better success, at least initially, for sure. But I think that the incentives that come with tokenization of things and behavior is important in the whole blockchain space overall.
It would make it better, sure, right? You know, if you link it, let's say, to insurance, and I can be incentivized, you know, my premium will be reduced $1 a month for each token I earn because I demonstrate that I'm walking 10,000 steps a day, that kind of thing, or I'm eating this or not eating that. You know, all that gamification and incentivization is great with tokens, but it seems like the first thing is at least give people a choice. Am I more worried about being misdiagnosed and killed, you know, or getting sicker or not getting treated because my data is in 84 different places and I can't get to it? Or am I worried about a hacker maybe getting it and, you know, or not being able to monetize it myself? Like, I think people should have that choice, and they don't.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. I mean, it is still pretty new in the healthcare space. So, like, for example, there are, you know, a few dozen good companies, in my opinion, that are out there now, like actually gaining some market traction, and people are partnering with them to do trials and testing. So I think there is a bright future ahead. Organizations like Hashed Health is really helping to educate people on a lot of these issues and a lot of these types of applications. Provider credentialing is another important, or, you know, maybe even one of the first applications that will become adopted, I think. And multiple companies are attempting that as well. And many of them aren't even using like tokens that gain value either. It's just more like a distributed ledger technology without tokens. So yeah, there are lots of potential out there. The reason it's not being adopted right now is it's very new. It's a strange thing, and it's probably the same reason blockchain is not being adopted everywhere or immediately, or how Bitcoin still is, you know, gaining traction, but not, you know, massively used. You know, not everybody is using it.
Right. Well, being on the inside somewhat and knowing the industry and doing a podcast and now talking to, you know, dozens of companies, which I'm sure will grow into the hundreds over time. I mean, now what's your perception of the industry? Is it getting there? You know, how many years until we've got my medical data is on some kind of blockchain and I can see it all and maybe monetize it? And what do you think is going to happen, and when, and what are the steps?
Yeah, I mean, I think the steps now are really about education. I think a lot of small companies, these startups, are trying to pursue pilot projects, which is great, and it's part of the education process. You'll have innovators and leaders in innovation actually trying to use blockchain in their existing operations, but I think that'll take at least 2 to 3 years to actually be widespread. I don't think you'll have your medical records on the blockchain for at least another 3 to 5 years. That's how I'm seeing it. But I could be wrong, and I hope I'm wrong. But based on the trends that I'm seeing, this is going to be a slow process. It's going to change the way we look at security, privacy, and yeah, it's going to put the onus and responsibility back on the patient's end versus having to rely on the providers for maintaining that secure and private records.
All right.
Yeah.
And then, you know, if you want, we can talk a little bit about your podcast. You know, we talked about the subject of it, but I don't know. You know, occasionally people ask me, you know, why do you do a podcast and what do you get out of it? So, if you want to talk about yours a little bit, I'll ask you some of those same questions, like what prompted you to start it? You know, first
Absolutely.
of all.
Yeah. So the reason I started the podcast, or the reason I thought it would be a good idea, was I was personally very interested in, you know, improving healthcare as an industry overall. And, I did an MBA where my focus was on the healthcare industry. And I kept running into the same problem. People were spending a lot of time and effort trying to validate information or data. And it was just, people running in circles. And I realized blockchain seems to be a great solution, but no one was really talking about blockchain in healthcare that much. There were a few companies at the time, and, Hashed Health was one of the companies that were around when I thought about the idea, and they were part of my inspiration. And I realized, okay, well, I want to learn as much as I can about this. And that means I have to talk to a lot of people. And maybe instead of just talking to those people and, benefiting myself, I can actually benefit the entire community. The whole idea behind blockchain, or the ethos behind it, is really about community and how you can have multiple parties trusting in the same network, really. And I thought, okay, well, I think that this is going to be a big thing, and in the future. So let me start these interviews with CEOs of healthcare and blockchain companies and see what happens and see what kind of traction I get and who's interested in it. And since I started, I've been at a few conferences. I'll be, speaking at a conference actually in October as well, October 15th. That's the ConV2X conference in Boston. And,
Okay.
it's just been great meeting a lot of new people, learning about what they're working on. And yeah, that's kind of how I got into it, really.
Yeah, I can tell you. I mean, you probably know this, but after a while, if you talk to enough people, and I'm not saying it's derogatory, but I feel like I've got like a bird's eye view of the industry. I can see all the players, where they're going, what they're doing, and it
Yeah.
just allows you to, choose the spot in the industry that you want to be in, and just have a better sense of all the possibilities. And that's what I found by doing it. It's like ants in an ant farm. I can see what Hashed Health is doing, and this ant is building this tunnel, and what's this one doing. That's the perspective I've gotten from it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's been really eye-opening, how companies talk about blockchain. And some companies, I can, after my interview, I'm like, I don't think that your business model is sustainable. I might
Mm-hmm.
not tell them that right away, but I might be thinking it just based on my previous conversations with people. And again, like I really do hope that everyone I talk to is successful in what they're doing. But I think that there's so much complexity in this industry, and if they don't have, a healthcare background or any experience in implementing new technology in healthcare, it's very difficult to get into it. So
Yeah.
you're right. Having that bird eye view is super useful.
Yeah, you also hear a lot of a lot of different angles and possibilities that you may not have thought of. Oh, yeah, that's
Hmm.
true. I didn't know you could. That's interesting to do that with healthcare. Maybe I can incorporate that into what I'm doing. Or you hear someone that's just a really great explainer of a thing, a real good
Yeah.
simplifier, so it makes total sense. And you can, okay, that's a good way. I'll explain it that way from now on. That's some of the other benefits that I've gotten from doing it, and I made a lot of friends and contacts. You get to, everyone knows you if you're friendly and people like you, and then it makes it
Yeah.
easier to be in an industry anyway as well.
That's totally true. And like me, my personality, I do love meeting new people, talking to them, and networking at different events, and just like, making friends with people. I think that is part of the reason I did this. I love talking and especially about this topic. It's very fascinating to me. And I truly do think it's going to change the way we not only view healthcare as an industry, but the way we view our health, or the way we, you know, experience life. Really, that's how I see it. And one thing to
Hmm.
also note, I did have a previous podcast before I started Health Unchained, which I started with a few classmates of mine at Boston University during my MBA, and that one is called Positive Feedback Loop. It's not about blockchain or healthcare. It's kind of open ended. We just talk about almost kind of like random subjects, but we are very different in our approaches or how we think about the world, really. So it creates kind of like conflicts and clashes in our conversation. So I think it is a stimulating um, podcast as well. So I encourage your listeners to check that out if they're interested. And it's not
Yeah.
technical at all, so it's pretty fun. It's called Positive Feedback Loop.
Okay. And yeah, what's your goal now over the next year or a couple of years? What do you hope to happen with the podcast and with blockchain and healthcare itself?
Yeah, I mean, the goal for me right now is really to just keep generating more content and hopefully make a reputation for myself where I can be a trusted source for kind of information on the industry and, grow in that way. I would like to build a community around my podcast. So having all these guests that have been on the show, many of them are also in my Telegram community. So we have conversations online, and anyone is welcome to join that. It is public as well. So I just continue to try to grow that, and hopefully people will realize like the true impact this can have on the world. So yeah, I'm just very encouraged by all of that. And I encourage people to, get out there and try to learn a little bit about it. I think it's like, it's going to affect you one way or the other. Everyone is affected by healthcare in one way or another.
Yeah, that's true. Unfortunately.
Yeah.
At first we're affected in a good way, and then in the end we're affected in the ultimate way. But
Right.
So, all right. Well, so what are some resources for listeners so they can listen to your old podcast, your new podcast? I mean, what are a few resources for people to follow up with you?
Yeah, I mean, I'm on LinkedIn for sure. Just search Ray Dogum on LinkedIn. And I have a website, healthunchained.org, you can check out. And yeah, just feel free to reach out to me through LinkedIn is probably the best way.
Okay. Well, Ray, thanks for coming. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Richard.
You're listening to the Future Tech Health Podcast with Richard Jacobs. Until I reached age 40, I never realized the obvious, that we all have medical issues, or we at least have a family member or close relation that has, or will have them in the future. Medicine and biological systems are the final frontier. Until we've conquered death, figured out how life began, cured cancer, and understood our purpose in the universe, there's a heck of a lot to talk about when it comes to our health. Future Tech Health means I'll be covering futuristic topics that are actually already in clinical trials, or even starting to appear on shelves or by prescription, or available for your own use. We dive deep into stem cells, CRISPR-Cas9, the science of sleep, epigenetics, medical testing, cancer, ketogenic diets, stem cells, aging, regenerative medicine, and more. My goal for you, the listener, is to learn from these podcasts. You may very well learn something that may change the course of your life for the better, steer you towards a new career, or give you insight into addressing a serious medical problem. Remember, however, this podcast and its content is informational in nature only. No medical, tax, legal, financial, or psychological advice is being given. If you enjoyed the podcast, please listen, subscribe, like, and share it with friends. Thank you.